My husband was in a car accident, and the doctor asked me to sign for him. I said, pull the tube, it won't be saved. My husband choked up. I immediately took him to the crematorium and burned him to ashes, along with his disgusting will. The mother-in-law brought her pregnant lover to make trouble. Hee, make trouble, go to prison. I helped Simon into the hospital hall, his face ugly like the darkest ash on the palette. It's not a big deal, it's just a headache, I really don't need to use the hospital. He rubbed his temples, his tone full of impatience. You've been having a headache for a month, and every time I ask for an examination, you shirk and say you're busy. I grabbed his arm to prevent him from escaping, and I had to find out before going to Nanching this time. The uncle in line on the side glanced at us. Young man, your daughter-in-law is right, your health is important. Simon shook off my hand irritably. Hurry up and leave after the examination, I will meet again in the afternoon. After the nurse took his blood pressure, her eyes widened. 190/110, why are you still working so high? My heart sank, and I immediately took him for an MRI. When I waited for the results, I recalled all the abnormalities in the past month. He always covered his head and said that he was in pain, woke up suddenly when he slept at night, and sometimes he couldn't walk steadily. Simon's family, please come in. The doctor's voice interrupted my thoughts. I walked into the consultation room holding Simon's hand, his palms covered in cold sweat. A tumor was found in the brain, and the location was tricky. The doctor pointed to the shadows on the film, his voice heavy. Simon stood up all of a sudden. Impossible. When pigs fly. I pressed his shoulders and forced him to sit down. Doctor, what is the success rate of the operation? Only 50%, and now it cannot be operated immediately. It needs to be controlled with medication first, and then talk about it when the physical condition is suitable. How long will that take? My voice trembled a little. About a month. The doctor sighed. Simon also asked me about the situation, and I told him the truth. I looked at Simon, who was slumped in his chair, as if all his strength had been drained. After the hospitalization procedures were completed, Simon fell asleep quickly on the hospital bed, but his brows furrowed tightly. I stayed by the bed for a few days, looking at his emaciated face, and I couldn't breathe in distress. You fool, why do you work so hard? When I got up to help him tidy up his bedside table, I found a notebook in his bag. The book fell to the ground, and the spread page had the word "will" written on it. My heart tightened suddenly. I looked at Simon, who was sleeping, and bent down to pick up my notebook. The scribbled handwriting reveals the writer's restlessness, which he probably wrote after learning about the success rate of the operation. I read word by word, my hands getting colder and colder. The will gave half of the property to her in-laws and the other half to a woman named Fiona, and specifically told her, take good care of the children. And I, his wife, didn't have a penny. Fiona. I thought about it carefully, and a bewitching figure appeared in my mind. It was his former secretary, and every time I saw her in the company, she looked coquettish, lying in front of Simon's desk, her legs thin and long under her short skirt. At that time I felt uncomfortable and asked Simon to change secretaries, and he readily agreed. We have been married for 3 years and have been together since he was a poor boy, working together to build the company we have today. But now it seems that the exemplary husband I thought of had betrayed me a long time ago. Even more ironically, Fiona was already pregnant with his child. I stood in front of the window, looking at the patients coming and going downstairs, and suddenly felt a little funny. If I had known this, I shouldn't have taken him for examination, let that tumor grow a little bigger, and directly kill him. Zoe, the nurse pushed the door in. It's time to take Simon's temperature. I put away my notebook, turned around and smiled gently. Okay, I'll help. I sat in the cafe booth, my slender fingers tapping lightly on the tabletop. Excuse me, are you Zoe? A man in a gray trench coat walked up to me. I nodded. Sit down, Detective Liam. He took out a brown paper bag and placed it on the table, and I could feel his expression looking at me. The result was much more wonderful than expected. He lowered his voice and said. My fingers stopped in midair, and the scene from the first time I met Fiona flashed through my mind. I suddenly went to the office to look for Simon that day, and the moment I opened the office door, I saw a woman lying on his desk. "Simon, you can take another look at this document." Her voice was so sweet that she deliberately raised her legs under her miniskirt. Simon actually rubbed her hair with a smile. "Fiona, you look like a little fox with this naughty look." I stood at the door, and Simon immediately put away his smile when he saw me. "Wife, why are you here?" Fiona also quickly stood up straight and called politely, "Hello Zoe." "Detective Liam, tell me about the results of the investigation." I pulled my thoughts back to reality. "After Fiona left your company, she went straight to Nanching." He opened the folder. "Simon bought her a house worth 3 million there." I picked up the coffee and took a sip, and my sneer was reflected in the cup. Not only that, Fiona also became the manager of the Nanching branch, with a monthly salary of 50,000 yuan. What a big deal. I put down my coffee cup. "Is there anything else?" "This is a copy of the real estate certificate, this is her bank statement, this." He laid out the evidence one by one. I looked through the documents carefully and suddenly saw a prenatal checkup form from the hospital. "Miss Fiona is 6 months pregnant." Detective Liam added, "She is said to have often flaunted in front of her colleagues, saying that the child's father was a big rich boss." When the couple at the next table heard this, the girl said indignantly, "This kind of mistress is really disgusting." I continued to look through the information and found that Simon goes to the South City almost every month for a few days. Business trips, he always prevaricated me like this. Another thing is strange, Detective Liam lowered, the flow of funds in the Nanching branch is very chaotic, there is a lot of cash in and out, and the whereabouts are unknown. I raised my eyebrows. "Oh? Tell me about it in detail." "There is a shell company that frequently receives transfers from the Nanching branch, and the amount is very large." I looked at the traffic outside the window, and I already had an idea in my head. "Thank you for your hard work." I transferred 50,000 yuan to Detective Liam. "I keep these materials." Back at the hospital, I looked at Simon sleeping on the hospital bed and remembered what he had said when he pursued me, "As long as you marry me, I will be good to you for the rest of my life." Now that I think about it, it's really ridiculous. I took out my mobile phone and dialed a number. "Hey, Zach, help me check all the accounts of the Nanching branch in the past 3 years. Zoe, this. Don't worry, I'll give you a satisfactory price." My voice was very soft. "Also, help me contact a few working reporters." After hanging up the phone, I looked at the will in my hand, and a sneer appeared on the corner of my mouth. "Since you are so heartless, then don't blame me for being ruthless." When the nurse pushed the door in to change the dressing, I had already regained my gentle and virtuous appearance. "Nurse, how is he doing today?" "I'm going to Nanching." Simon came out of the ward and said as he tidied up his suit. I froze in place with the freshly heated porridge. "The doctor said you can't do it now. You have to go." He interrupted me, "There's an urgent matter over there." The passing doctor frowned. "Simon, your current situation is very dangerous, it could be at any time." "I know my own body." Simon waved his hand impatiently. I put down the porridge bowl, and my voice became a little colder. "Yes, urgent matters matter, life is not important." "What do you mean?" He turned his head and glared at me. I pulled out a smile. "It's nothing, I'll go pack my things." When I got home, I took out a document from the safe that had been prepared. The top page of the document is an insurance contract, but below is the equity transfer agreement. I gently stroked the neat words with my fingers, remembering the scene when we started a business together 3 years ago. Simon was so high-spirited then, who would have thought that he would betray me now? In the restaurant, Simon absent-mindedly picked up the food, his eyes frequently looking at his watch. "Simon, sign it." I took out the documents. He didn't raise his head. "What is it?" "I'll talk about it when I get back." "The insurance I bought for you." I pushed the document forward. "You have to have surgery, you must have a guarantee." He impatiently turned the first page and turned directly to the back when he saw the word insurance. "Sign quickly, it's too late if you don't sign it," I urged. Simon looked at his watch. "The high-speed train will start in half an hour." Then hurry up. I stuffed the pen into his hand. He swept over at a glance and signed his name in a flying manner. The waiter at the next table secretly glanced at us while cleaning up the dishes, probably thinking that the couple was very strange. Press the handprint. I handed him the ink. Simon impatiently pressed the red seals. Okay? I put away the documents. Be careful on the road. Goodbye. He picked up his bag and walked out. I looked at his back and thought, goodbye, I will never see you again. 3 hours later, I received a call from the hospital. Zoe, your husband was in a car accident. I sat in the taxi and recalled Fiona's words that she posted on Moments yesterday. Baby, Mom is waiting for your dad to come and see us. Outside the hospital emergency room, the doctor looked at me with a solemn expression. Simon's condition is very dangerous, the brain tumor has been impacted. What is the success rate of surgery? I asked calmly. Less than 20%, and even if it is saved, it may. I interrupted him, then it won't be saved. What? The doctor's eyes widened. Pull the pipe, I said softly, and let him walk a little more decently. The other patients' families in the hallway looked at me with incredible eyes. Are you crazy? An aunt shouted, that's your husband. I turned my head to look at her. My husband had a car accident on the way to the mistress. Do you think I should save him? The entire corridor was instantly quiet. The nurse brought me a critical illness notice, and I signed my name in the Give Up Rescue column. When I signed, I remembered his signature on the equity transfer this morning. Simon, this is the path you choose. In less than half an hour, the lights in the operating room went out. The time of death was pronounced, 4:20 p.m. I took out my phone and turned on the camera to point it at the rolled-out hospital bed. What are you doing? The nurse asked in surprise. I replied lightly, take a posthumous photo of him, his parents must want to see what their son looks like in the end. Actually, I know that these photos have a more important purpose. I glanced at Simon's pale face on the phone screen and turned to walk towards the morgue. Are the cremation procedures ready? I asked the staff, I'm in a hurry. The door of the crematorium slowly opened, and the staff turned around and asked, Zoe, do you want to take one last look? No. I said in a calm voice, just cremate it. The staff standing next to me muttered softly, this is the first time I've seen such a calm widow. The moment the flames rose, I pulled out Simon's notebook and threw the disgusting will into the fire. You can't just throw things away. The staff wanted to stop it. I turned my head and smiled at him, it's just a piece of paper, just to accompany him on the last journey. After the cremation was completed, I drove directly to the company. Good morning, everyone. I walked into the conference room in high heels, with Simon's urn in my purse. All the top executives were stunned, and Evelyn Rose, the financial director, stammered, Zoe, why are you here? I looked around and sat down in the main seat. Simon has passed away, and I will take over the company from today onwards. The conference room exploded instantly, and the voices were noisy. I took out a stack of documents and slapped them on the table. This is the equity transfer book, with Simon's autograph and handprint. Impossible. The marketing manager slammed the case. Simon was fined 2 days ago. I turned on the projector, and the hospital's medical certificate, death certificate, and cremation certificate were presented one by one. Simon suffered from a brain tumor, and the doctor asked him to recuperate, and he insisted on going to South City, but he got into a car accident. Archibald Reese, who was sitting in the corner, suddenly said, Yes, I know about this, last time I saw Zoe helping Simon to the hospital. I nodded. As one of the founders of the company, I have the responsibility and ability to lead everyone forward. An hour later, all executives signed the new appointment letter. Just as the meeting was about to end, my phone rang. What? My son is dead? My mother-in-law's scream almost shook my eardrums. Impossible. When pigs fly. I pressed the speakerphone so that everyone could hear the hysteria. Mom, mourn. My voice was still calm. Simon has been cremated. You poisonous woman. The mother-in-law scolded, "You didn't even notify us of our son's death." The people in the conference room looked at each other and whispered. I hung up the phone, turned to everyone and said, "It seems that we have to prepare to welcome the two angry elders." 3 hours later, the in-laws rushed back from Hainan and went directly to the company. "I want to see my son." My mother-in-law rushed into my office, and her hair was almost standing on end. I put the urn on the table. "Simon is here." The in-laws were stunned, as if they couldn't believe everything in front of him. "You, how dare you?" My mother-in-law pounced on me and wanted to hit me. I turned sideways and dodged. "This is all the supporting documents of the hospital, you can check it." The front desk lady poked her head in. "Zoe, the reporter is here, saying that she is making an appointment for an interview." "Let them wait." I said to my in-laws, "If you don't believe it, you can go to the hospital, the traffic police team, and the funeral home." The mother-in-law trembled and flipped through the documents. "This is impossible. My son was fine some time ago." I sneered, "Yes, it's good enough to raise a lover outside behind my back." The whole office instantly fell silent. What do you mean?" The father-in-law finally spoke. I turned my head to look out the window. "It's nothing, you'll know when the reporter comes later." "Zoe, get out of here." The mother-in-law's voice exploded in the company hall. I was signing a contract with a client when I heard the panicked voice of the front desk lady. "Everyone, please calm down, Zoe is in a meeting." "What meeting?" A thin female voice interjected. "Let her come out to see us." I put down the signature pen and smiled apologetically at the customer. "Sorry, I'll take care of it." Pushing open the glass door of the conference room, I saw my mother-in-law pulling a woman with a big belly inside. "It's Fiona. This is Simon's widow, right?" The customer asked with a smile. "It's all over the news." I nodded slightly. "Sorry to let you see the joke." Fiona was wearing a pink dress and glared at me arrogantly. "Zoe, this kid is Simon's, you must give me an inheritance." The people in the entire hall stopped their work and looked at us in unison. I leaned against the front desk and put my hands on my chest. "What about the evidence?" "What other evidence do you want?" The mother-in-law exclaimed. "I can testify. This is my grandson." I smiled. "Just by your mouth?" Jenny at the front desk secretly winked at me, and I knew she had started recording according to the plan. "You are shameless." Fiona covered her stomach and sat on the ground. "I'm going to faint." I took out my mobile phone and dialed the number of the security department. "Come a few people, take the one on the ground to the hospital." Fiona's eyes widened. You dare?" I looked down at her. "Why don't I dare? You can't even prove who the child is, why should I be afraid of you?" The security guard came over to help Fiona, and she immediately jumped up. The onlookers burst into laughter. "What are you laughing at?" The mother-in-law was like a cat with fried hair. "This is my daughter-in-law." I said coldly. "Oh? Daughter-in-law? Then why don't you tell me, how did your son buy a house and a car for her when he was still alive, and how did you arrange her into the Nanchang branch?" Fiona's face turned pale instantly. I continued, "Speaking of which, you are really a good mother-in-law, knowing that her son has someone outside, not only did not stop him, but also helped hide it from me." The next day, the headlines of major self-media were, "Wealthy family horror, the deceased husband left not only the ashes, but also the pregnant mistress." The comment area was full of scolding. "This mistress is too shameless." "The mother-in-law is even more disgusting, and she actually helped her son hide from his original wife. Look at how powerful the main room is, and clean up this pair of top-notch mother-in-law and daughter-in-law." Someone put a loudspeaker at the door of the community where Fiona lived and played it on a loop. "The mistress of an executive of a certain company lives here and is 6 months pregnant." Fiona's parents couldn't sit still and approached her to ask for forgiveness. "You bastard." Fiona's father slapped her in the face. "I worked hard to train you to become a college student, and you are so embarrassed for me?" Fiona covered her face and cried. "I thought he would divorce Zoe." "Divorce?" Wang's mother sneered. "People are very loving, you jump into the fire pit yourself." The momentum on the internet is getting bigger and bigger, and Fiona doesn't dare to go out. and she can receive dead rats and swill from couriers every day. Finally one day, she got through to me. Zoe. Her voice was crying, I know I'm wrong. I looked at the moon outside the window. Do you know what's wrong? It's late. Please, remove those horns, I'm going crazy. I smiled softly. Where is this? Fiona, the game has just begun. Zach, how is the account book of the Nanching branch? I sat in the president's office, my fingers tapping lightly on the table. The financial director pushed his glasses. Zoe, I found a problem, a big problem. He opened his laptop and pulled up a string of data. In the past 3 years, a large amount of money has flowed to a company called Thames, Thornwood Company every month. I raised my eyebrows. How big is the amount? The cumulative amount exceeds 20 million. Zach's voice trembled a little. The most important thing is that this Thames, Thornwood Co. is a shell company. I stood up and walked to the window. Have you found out where the money ended up? Dispersed into a dozen private accounts, several of which are. He paused. It's Fiona's. I turned around and saw several directors standing at the door at some point. Zoe, this matter must be investigated thoroughly. Alexander Hayes' face turned pale. 20 million is not a small amount. I nodded. Please sit down, let's have a good chat. The projector lit up, and Zach began to explain in detail the problems he found. As the legal person and financial head of the Nanching branch, Fiona needs her signature for these violations. Isn't this embezzlement of public funds? Liam Forrester slammed the case and stood up. It's just bold. Olivia Bennett, who was sitting in the corner, suddenly said, Zoe, I remembered, last year I went to Nanching to talk about cooperation. Simon said that it was difficult to turn over funds, so it didn't work. I sneered. Do you know where the money is now? There was silence in the conference room, and everyone was digesting the fact that Simon, whom they respected, was actually doing this. Must call the police. Liam Forrester stood up. I shook my head. Don't worry, this is just the beginning. In the afternoon of the same day, I took the audit team to the Nanching branch. When Fiona saw us enter the door, her face turned pale instantly. Zoe. Fiona, please take out all the company's ledgers and contracts. I took off my coat and handed it to the assistant. I'm not feeling well, I want to ask for leave. She covered her stomach and was about to walk out. I said coldly, that's just right, let the police go to the hospital to find you. Fiona's legs went weak and she almost fell. Police, 20 million holes, do you think we will not call the police if we find out? The entire office gasped. The audit continued, and the problem was more serious than imagined. Zoe, Thames, Thornwood Co.'s money is just the tip of the iceberg. Zach looked solemn. Simon also transferred at least 30 million through other means. I looked at the thick audit report. Where did all this money come from? Embezzlement of company funds, false invoicing, and false accounts. I interrupted him. Is this evidence enough? Enough, Zach nodded, and all violations were signed by Fiona. I picked up my phone and dialed Fiona's number. Zoe. Her voice was crying. 50 million. I said directly, this is the total amount of illegal funds you handled. There was a bang on the other end of the phone, and it seemed that Fiona was slumped on the ground. Do you know why Simon made you a legal person? I continued, because of these illegal things, someone will take the blame. Fiona began to howl. It's not like this. He said he loved me. I sneered. What he loves is your ability to help him take the blame. Hanging up the phone, I said to Zach, prepare the indictment and sort out all the evidence. Yes. Zach hesitated. Zoe, are you really going to sue Fiona? I looked at the sunset outside the window. Otherwise? Let me raise her children? Fiona knelt in my office, her 6-month pregnant belly resting on my desk. Zoe, please let me go. I picked up the coffee and took a sip. Do you know how much money you owe the company now? I don't know. Her makeup was already crying. I threw a document in front of her. 50 million, as a legal person of the company, you are fully responsible for this money. Colleagues passing by the door poked their heads in and whispered. I can testify. Fiona suddenly looked up. These are all instructed by Simon. I put down my coffee cup. How to prove it? He was dead. And his parents. Fiona was like a lifesaver, they all know these things. I smiled, so what? I can help you. She bit her lip. I got up and walked to the window. Are you sure you want to cooperate with me? The price is not small. Fiona wiped her tears. I'm willing to do anything, as long as you don't sue me. The sun shone on her through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I could clearly see her red eyes. The first condition, I turned around, knocked the child off. Fiona covered her stomach. No. This is my child with Simon. I sneered. What proof do you have? Even if you are born, you will not be able to share the inheritance, but it will drag you down. Her tears fell again. I continued, do you think your in-laws really feel sorry for you? They just want to keep a bloodline. Fiona fell silent. 3 days later, I accompanied her to the hospital. Don't be afraid, I sat outside the operating room, and it was over quickly. Fiona lay on the cart, tears streaming down her face. Simon, I'm sorry. Before the nurse pushed her in, I whispered, remember, this is your own choice. The operation lasted 2 hours, and suddenly there was a scream. You bitch. How dare you kill my grandson? The mother-in-law rushed out of nowhere and pounced on Fiona, who had just been pushed out of the operating room. I leaned against the wall to watch the play, and the doctors and nurses were dumbfounded. Ah. Fiona was kicked in the stomach, and the blood instantly stained the sheets. The nurse screamed and shouted, quick. Maternal bleeding. The mother-in-law wanted to kick again, but was pulled by the security guard. Are you crazy? It's going to kill someone. Fiona was rushed back to the operating room, and her in-laws were crying and making trouble outside. It's all you. My mother-in-law pointed to my nose. You poisonous woman, you killed my son and forced my grandson to death. I smiled. Fiona is a voluntary abortion, and I can't persuade her. Impossible. My mother-in-law shouted hysterically. She loves Simon so much, how could she? I interrupted her. Love? She was just afraid of going to jail. When Fiona was pushed out again, she was unconscious. Doctors said she had lost too much blood and might never be able to have children in the future. I looked at the pale face on the hospital bed and took out my phone to record. Fiona, can you talk about Simon's illegal things now? She nodded weakly and began to explain. In the recording, she told more amazing inside stories. The next day, I handed over the recording to the police along with other evidence. The in-laws and Fiona were both taken to make records. I stood at the door of the police station and watched the 3 people being taken away. The defendant Fiona, guilty of embezzlement of public funds, was sentenced to imprisonment. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, and I sat in the auditorium and watched Fiona collapse in the dock. The in-laws were tried in another court on charges of unlawful embezzlement of company property. The verdict is out. Zoe, these assets are awarded to you. The lawyer handed me a stack of documents. I turned the first page and saw the numbers of real estate, equity, and cash, and a sneer appeared on the corner of my mouth. 3 months later, I was standing in front of the company's new building, and the ribbon-cutting ceremony was about to begin. Zoe is really a heroine among women. The reporters gathered around with microphones. In just 3 months, the company's market value has doubled. I wore a custom-made champagne suit and stepped on 10-centimeter heels. It's just luck. Zach secretly winked at the other executives on the side. Luck? Zoe works until the early hours of the morning every day. Is this called luck? In the conference room, a group of young male executives were sitting upright, their eyes wandering. Sophia Whitaker, why did this project lose money? I point to the data on the projection screen. Sophia Whitaker wiped her sweat. The market is not good. I interrupted him. Not good? How did the company next door make a profit? The whole conference room was silent. I stood up, and the sound of my high heels hitting the ground was particularly crisp. Give you 3 days to make a new plan. In the corridor, several female employees looked at me adoringly. Zoe is so handsome. There was a whisper in the pantry. I heard that someone sent a private message to Zoe saying that he would like to be her little wolf dog. I shook my head and went back to the office. The sunset outside the window painted the whole city gold, and I remembered the days when I started my business with Simon. At that time, we stood in front of this window and said that we would build a country together. Unexpectedly, in the end, I was the only one who fulfilled this dream. The front desk lady knocked on the door and came in. "Zoe, there is a man who claims to be your college classmate wants to meet you." I glanced at the visitor registration. "No," he said. The front desk wanted to say something but stopped. I looked up. "What did he say?" "He said he had a crush on you, and now you're single." I laughed. "Tell him I'm not interested in marriage anymore." At night, I drove home alone. When passing by the crematorium, I remembered the fire that day. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like now if Simon hadn't betrayed me. But there is no answer to this question. When I got home, I made a glass of red wine and looked at the walls of business maps. This is my life. I don't need men, I don't need love. The phone rang, and it was a headhunting company. "Zoe, we have a merger and acquisition project recently." I looked at my watch, and it was 1 o'clock in the morning. "Tell me," I picked up my glass, "I'm not asleep yet." The moonlight outside the window spilled on the floor, illuminating my shadow. This city will eventually know who is the real king. And there is still a long way to go. The next day's financial headlines: business upstart Zoe, from a wealthy daughter-in-law to a business queen. I closed the newspaper and said to the secretary, "Get ready, we're going to buy the chemical plant in Nanching." The game has just begun.